Get out of my house. The words didn't echo. They landed sharp final like something heavy dropped on a hardwood floor. No one gasped. No one moved. It was as if the entire room had been waiting for that exact sentence to be spoken out loud. I was still holding the paper. DNA test results, it read across the top in clinical impersonal lettering. Beneath it, numbers, markers, probabilities. And then the line that had turned my world inside out. Probability of paternity 0%. The child isn't mine, my husband had said just seconds earlier, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. I remember looking up at him, searching his face for anything, anger, confusion, doubt, but all I found was distance, a kind of quiet withdrawal that hurt more than shouting ever could. And then his mother stepped forward. She didn't hesitate, she didn't soften her tone. She pointed directly at me, her finger steady, her gaze colder than I had ever seen it. Get out of my house. That was the moment everything broke. Just 3 hours earlier, I had been standing in my kitchen rinsing strawberries for my son. Ethan was sitting in his high chair, swinging his little legs, humming to himself in that off-key way toddlers do when they're perfectly content. He had yogurt smeared across his cheek, and when I wiped it away, he giggled like I'd just told the funniest joke in the world. My phone rang. It was my husband. Hey, I said, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear as I reached for a clean towel. You're calling early. Yeah, he replied. His voice was off. Not cold, not warm, just tight. Can you come home early tonight? I frowned slightly. I am home. I mean my mom's place. She's hosting a family dinner. She wants everyone there by 6. I glanced at the clock. It was barely 3. Tonight, I asked. That's kind of sudden. She just put it together, he said quickly. It's important. There was a pause, a small one but noticeable. Okay, I said slowly. Is everything all right? Yeah, he answered a beat too fast. Just come okay. And then he hung up. I stood there for a moment, the silence in the kitchen suddenly louder than it should have been. Ethan babbled, reaching for another strawberry, completely unaware that something had shifted. I told myself not to overthink it. My mother-in-law Diane was known for her last-minute plans. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, even birthday celebrations. She liked control, liked being the center of it all. This wasn't unusual. Still, something about his voice stayed with me. By 5:45, I had Ethan dressed in his little blue shirt, the one with the tiny buttons that always made him look more grown-up than he actually was. I slipped into a simple white floral dress, brushed my hair, kept my makeup light. Normal, everything felt normal. The drive over was quiet. The sun was starting to dip, casting that soft golden light over the neighborhood. Diane's house came into view, large, well-kept, always immaculate. But as soon as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. Every car was already there. My husband's, his sister's, his uncle's truck, even his cousin Mark's beat-up sedan, which he only drove out for important family events. My stomach tightened. That's a lot of people, I murmured, unbuckling Ethan. He clapped his hands, oblivious, excited by the change of scenery. I carried him up the walkway, adjusting him on my hip as I reached the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. Diane stood there. She didn't smile. Come in, she said, stepping aside. No hug, no greeting, no you made it. Just come in. The air inside felt different, heavier. I stepped into the living room and stopped. Everyone was already seated. Not at the dining table. In the living room. Chairs arranged in a loose semicircle. Conversations cut off the second I entered. Eyes turned toward me one by one, like I had just walked onto a stage I didn't know existed. No one was smiling. Ethan shifted in my arms, sensing the tension, his small hand gripping the fabric of my dress. Hi, I said, my voice thinner than I intended. No one answered. My husband stood near the window. He didn't come to greet me, didn't reach for Ethan, didn't even move. He just walked forward slowly, holding something in his hand. An envelope. Sit down, Diane said from behind me. I didn't. What is this? I asked, my eyes fixed on my husband. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw. He handed me the envelope without a word. My fingers felt clumsy as I opened it. The paper inside was crisp, official looking. I read the header. DNA test results. A strange hollow feeling spread through my chest. And then I saw the line. The one that changed everything. When I looked up, my husband finally spoke. The child isn't mine. And just like that, the room turned into a courtroom, and I was already guilty. For a moment I couldn't hear anything. The room was still full of people, full of eyes, but it felt like someone had sealed me inside glass. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, loud and uneven, drowning out whatever came next. The child isn't mine. I looked down at Ethan. He had tucked his face into my shoulder, his fingers clutching the fabric of my dress like he could sense the shift in the air. He didn't understand words like DNA or paternity, but he understood tension. Children always do. "That's not true," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "It can't be." No one responded. Not immediately. And somehow that silence was worse than shouting. Diane stepped forward first, as if she had been waiting for her cue. "It's right there in black and white," she said, her tone controlled but edged with something sharp. "Scientific. Verified." Verified by who, I asked, my grip tightening around the paper. Where did this even come from? My husband finally spoke again. "I ordered it," he said, "a few weeks ago." The words hit me harder than anything Diane had said. "A few weeks ago," I repeated, staring at him. "You did this behind my back." I needed to be sure, he replied. Sure of what? My voice cracked, now the disbelief rising to the surface. "That I cheated on you." A murmur rippled through the room. His sister Karen shifted in her seat, arms crossed tightly. "Well, it's not like these things just happen," she said under her breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I turned to her. "Excuse me." She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I'm just saying, tests don't lie." "That's not always true," I shot back. "There can be mistakes, mix-ups." "Oh, come on," his uncle interrupted, leaning forward with a heavy sigh. "You expect us to believe this is some kind of lab error?" "Yes," I said louder now, "because I know the truth." "And what is that?" Diane asked, her voice cutting cleanly through the room. I met her gaze. "I have never been unfaithful to your son." There it was. Plain, direct, the truth as steady as I could make it. But instead of relief of understanding, I saw something else ripple across their faces. Skepticism. Doubt. Even disappointment. As if my answer wasn't enough. As if it had already been decided that it wouldn't be. Diane let out a slow breath, shaking her head slightly. "I raised my son to be many things," she said. "But a fool isn't one of them." My chest tightened. "So that's it?" I asked. "You all just decided based on one piece of paper?" "It's not just paper," Karen snapped. "It's evidence." "Evidence of what I demanded. A result you don't even understand." My husband finally looked at me, then really looked. And for a split second I thought I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Doubt. Conflict. But it disappeared just as quickly. "Then explain it," he said. His voice wasn't angry, that would have been easier to face. It was tired. "Explain how a test says I'm not the father." I opened my mouth. And then closed it. "Because how do you explain something you don't understand yourself?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaking, "but I know it's wrong." "That's not good enough," Diane said sharply. Ethan stirred in my arms, letting out a small confused whimper. That sound broke something in me. "He's your grandson," I said, my voice soft but urgent. "Look at him." No one moved. "Look at him," I repeated, stepping forward slightly. My husband hesitated but didn't step closer. Diane didn't even glance. "He looks like every other baby at that age," she said dismissively. "That proves nothing." The room tilted slightly. I tightened my hold on Ethan, grounding myself in the weight of him, the warmth of his small body. "This is insane," I whispered. "All of you, this is insane." "No," Diane said. "What's insane is thinking you can walk into this family and deceive us." "I didn't deceive anyone." My voice echoed, now sharp against the walls. "And yet here we are," Karen muttered. The whispers started then. Low, hushed, but constant. "She seemed so nice. I always thought something was off. Poor him, raising another man's child." Each word chipped away at me piece by piece. I looked back at my husband. He stood there silent again. Not defending me, not stopping them. Just letting it happen. That hurt more than anything. "You believe them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You really believe I would do this to you?" He didn't answer right away. And in that pause I got my answer. "I don't know what to believe," he finally said. Something inside me went very, very still. Not anger. Not panic. Just clarity. Because in that moment I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. It didn't matter what I said. I had already been judged. The verdict had been reached before I ever walked through that door. Diane stepped forward again, her patience clearly gone. "This has gone on long enough," she said. "You've embarrassed this family enough for one night." I straightened, slowly adjusting Ethan on my hip. "I didn't embarrass anyone," I said quietly. "You did that yourselves." Her eyes narrowed. "Leave," she said. And this time there was no mistaking it. "Get out of my house." The words hung in the air. Final. I looked around the room one last time. At the faces I had spent years trying to belong to. At the man I had trusted more than anyone. And then I nodded. "Okay," I said softly. I turned toward the door, my steps steady despite the storm inside me. My hand had just reached for the handle when it opened, and a man I had never seen before stepped inside. "Excuse me," he said calmly, glancing around the room. "I'm looking for..." His eyes landed on the paper still clutched in my hand. And then on my husband. "I believe we need to talk about that DNA test." Everything stopped. No one spoke. The man stood just inside the doorway, calm and composed, like he had walked into the wrong room and realized too late that it was exactly the right one. "I believe we need to talk about that DNA test." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, clear, professional, certain. Diane was the first to recover. "And who exactly are you?" she demanded, stepping forward with visible irritation. "This is a private family matter." The man didn't flinch. "My name is Daniel Reeves," he said, reaching into his jacket and producing a small ID card. "I'm a case coordinator with North Valley Diagnostics." My husband's expression shifted just slightly. "That's the lab," he said under his breath. Daniel nodded once. "Yes, sir. The same lab that processed the test you're holding." A ripple of tension moved through the room. Diane crossed her arms. "We've already received the results," she said sharply. "There's nothing left to discuss." "I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate," Daniel replied. Something in his tone, measured, careful, made my pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping forward before I could stop myself. He turned to me, his expression softening just a fraction. "Ma'am," he said, "there's been a complication regarding the sample processing of that test." The word complication hung in the air like a fragile thread. My husband frowned. "What kind of complication?" Daniel glanced around the room, clearly aware of the audience, but he didn't lower his voice. "A chain of custody discrepancy," he said. "Specifically a labeling error that occurred during intake." Silence. Not the heavy, judgmental silence from before. This one was different. Uncertain. Diane scoffed. "That sounds like a convenient excuse." "It's not an excuse," Daniel replied calmly. "It's a documented procedural error." I felt my grip tighten on Ethan as something fragile, something I hadn't dared to feel, began to rise inside me. Hope. "So, what does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "It means," Daniel said, looking directly at my husband, "now that the sample attributed to you may not have been yours." The room shifted. Karen straightened in her chair. "That's ridiculous," she said. "Those labs have protocols." "They do," Daniel agreed. "And when those protocols are breached, we're required to investigate and notify all involved parties." "Then why are we just hearing about this now?" my husband asked, his voice tighter than before. "Because the discrepancy was flagged during an internal audit," Daniel explained, "which concluded earlier today." He reached into his folder and pulled out another set of papers. "I came here as soon as I could." Diane shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This doesn't change anything," she insisted. "The result we have is clear." "It's also unreliable," Daniel said, not raising his voice but not backing down either. That landed. You could feel it. The certainty that had filled the room just minutes ago began to crack. "But even if there was a mix-up," Karen said quickly, clinging to the argument, "that doesn't automatically mean..." "It means the result cannot be considered valid," Daniel interrupted, still composed. "Legally or medically." My husband ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps like he was trying to catch up to something that had already moved ahead of him. "So what happens now?" he asked. Daniel held up the second document. "We conducted an expedited retest," he said, "using verified samples and corrected labeling procedures." My breath caught. Everything in me went still again, but this time it wasn't emptiness. It was anticipation. And I whispered. Daniel looked at me, then at my husband. And finally he spoke. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. The words didn't explode. They settled. Slowly. Deeply. Like something heavy finally finding its place after being dropped from too high. No one moved. No one spoke. The shift was almost physical. You could feel it in the air, in the way shoulders stiffened, in the way eyes avoided one another. I closed my eyes for just a second. Not in relief. Not yet. Because relief would mean this hadn't happened. And it had. When I opened them again, I looked straight at my husband. He wasn't looking at the paper. He was looking at me. Really looking for the first time since I had walked into that room. He started, but the word didn't go anywhere. Diane stepped forward again, her voice sharper now, but not as steady. There has to be another explanation, she said. You're saying the first test was wrong and this one is right, just like that. I'm saying, Daniel replied, that the second test followed verified protocol from start to finish. The chain of custody is intact. The samples were cross-checked and the results are conclusive. Karen shifted uncomfortably. But the first one should not have been released in the condition it was, Daniel said firmly. And for that, the lab takes full responsibility. His words were precise. Professional. But they carried weight. Enough to tip the balance. Diane opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since I had known her, she didn't have an immediate response. The room that had been so quick to judge had nothing to say. I adjusted Ethan gently in my arms. He had relaxed again, his breathing soft, unaware that his entire identity had just been questioned and restored in the span of minutes. I pressed my lips together, steadying myself. This is my son, I said quietly. No one argued. No one whispered. And yet the silence didn't feel like victory. It felt like aftermath. Because the truth hadn't just walked into the room. It had exposed everything that had been hiding there all along. No one applauded the truth. It didn't come with relief or even immediate apology. It just sat there, heavy, undeniable, like a mirror no one wanted to look into. Daniel Reeves gathered his documents with quiet efficiency. I'll leave copies of the corrected report, he said, placing them on the coffee table. If you have further questions, the lab will cooperate fully. My husband nodded, distracted. Thank you for coming. Daniel gave a small, respectful nod to me more than anyone else, then turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. And suddenly it was just us again. The same room. The same people. But everything had shifted. I looked around slowly, taking in the faces that minutes ago had been so certain. Karen's arms were no longer crossed. They hung awkwardly at her sides. My husband's uncle stared at the floor like it might offer him an escape. Even Diane, so composed, so commanding, looked unsettled. But none of that erased what had happened. My husband picked up the new report, scanning it like he needed to read it 10 times to believe it. 99.99, he murmured. I didn't move closer. Didn't reach for him. Because the distance between us wasn't physical anymore. It was something deeper. You should say something, Karen muttered under her breath, glancing at him. He looked up. At me. I'm sorry, he said. 2 words. Simple. But they didn't land the way he probably hoped they would. Are you? I asked quietly. He flinched, not dramatically, just enough to show it hit. Because you didn't just question me, I continued. You investigated me. You tested me behind my back. And then you brought me here. I gestured to the room so your entire family could watch me be torn apart. No one tore you apart, Diane snapped reflexively. I turned to her. No, I said. You told me to get out of your house. You pointed at me like I was something dirty you needed to remove. Her lips pressed together, but she didn't respond. That wasn't concern, I added. That was judgment. Silence again. My husband stepped closer, his voice lower now. I didn't know it would turn into this. You didn't stop it either, I said. That one landed. He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. I thought I needed answers. And you decided I wasn't worth asking, I replied. There it was. The core of it. Not the test. Not even the accusation. The choice. He didn't answer. Because there wasn't a good one. From across the room, Diane straightened slightly, regaining some of her composure. If there was confusion, she said carefully, "It's because the situation raised reasonable concerns." I let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh, but close. "Reasonable," I repeated. She nodded, holding on to that word like it could still defend her. "Your son doubted me," I said, "and instead of questioning that doubt, you supported it." "I protected my family," she said. "And I'm not your family?" I asked. That stopped her. For a second, something flickered across her face, something less certain, less controlled. But it passed. "You are," she said, "but situations like this—" "No," I interrupted gently. "Situations like this show exactly who counts." That one didn't need to be loud. It carried anyway. Karen shifted again. "Look, no one expected the test to be wrong," she said, softer now. "We reacted to what we were given." "And I reacted to being accused of something I didn't do," I replied. "In a room full of people who didn't give me the benefit of a single doubt." No one argued. Because they couldn't. Ethan stirred in my arms again, letting out a small sleepy sound. I adjusted him instinctively, pressing a soft kiss to his hair. That small, ordinary gesture grounded me. Reminded me what actually mattered. "I think you should stay," my husband said suddenly. "We can figure this out." I looked at him. Really looked. At the man I had built a life with. At the man who had stood in silence while I was dismantled. "I will talk," I said, "but not here." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this isn't something we fix in front of an audience," I said. "This isn't a misunderstanding we laugh off over dinner." Diane inhaled sharply, but I didn't look at her. "This is about trust," I continued. "And right now that's not something I feel." My husband swallowed. "So, what are you saying?" I shifted Ethan again, steadying myself before answering. "I'm saying I'm going home," I said, "with my son." And then he asked, "And then you decide," I replied, meeting his eyes, "whether you want to rebuild something or just pretend this didn't break it." He didn't speak. Didn't argue. Because for the first time that night he understood the position he was actually in. Not the victim. Not the judge. The one who had something to prove. I turned toward the door. This time no one stopped me. No one told me to leave. No one told me to stay. And somehow that silence felt more honest than anything that had come before it. As I stepped outside, the evening air felt different. Cooler. Clearer. Behind me, the house stood exactly as it had always been. But I knew something had shifted. Not just in them. In me. Because walking away this time wasn't defeat. It was choice. I didn't sleep much that night. Ethan did curled up beside me, one small hand resting against my arm like an anchor. Every time I shifted, he adjusted without waking, trusting that I was still there. That word stayed with me. Trust. Not the kind people say out loud, not promises or reassurances. The quiet kind. The kind you don't question until someone gives you a reason to. By morning, the house felt different, not broken, not empty. Just honest. I made coffee, fed Ethan, let the rhythm of small, ordinary things steady me. Around 9, there was a knock at the door. I didn't rush to answer it. I already knew who it was. When I opened it, my husband stood there alone. No mother, no sister, no audience. Just him. He looked tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from something heavier. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing you were wrong in a way that can't be undone. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't sure he deserved to be there. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the familiar things, the couch, the toys, the life we had built. Ethan looked up from the floor and broke into a smile. "Dada." That sound hit both of us. My husband froze for a fraction of a second, then crouched down, instinct taking over. Ethan toddled into his arms without hesitation, wrapping his little arms around his neck. No doubt. No distance. Just love. I watched them quietly. This is what you almost lost, I thought. Not just me. All of it. After a moment, he stood again, still holding Ethan like he wasn't ready to let go. "I don't deserve how easy that was," he said softly. "No," I replied, "you don't." He nodded. "I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough," he continued. "But I am. Not just for the test, for everything that came after it." I leaned against the counter, arms loosely folded, not closed off but not open either. You didn't trust me, I said. I doubted you, he corrected quietly, and instead of coming to you I went looking for proof to justify that doubt. That's worse, I said. I know. There was no defensiveness in his voice now, no excuses. Just recognition. I let my fear turn into suspicion, he continued. And I let my family's voices get louder than yours. That part mattered. Because it was true. I stood there, he added, his voice tightening slightly, and I watched them treat you like you didn't belong. And I didn't stop it. No, I said softly, you didn't. Ethan shifted in his arms, playing with the collar of his shirt, completely unaware of the weight of the moment. My husband looked down at him. I don't want to be that man, he said. The one who chooses doubt over the person he promised to trust. I studied him. Carefully. Because apologies are easy when the truth is already proven. What matters is what comes after. Your mother, I said after a moment. He exhaled slowly. She was wrong. That's not something she says easily. I know. And yet she said it this morning, he added. Not well, not perfectly, but she knows she crossed a line. I considered that. Diane apologizing even imperfectly meant something. Not everything, but something. And you, I asked? He met my eyes. I'm not asking you to forget, he said. I'm asking for the chance to rebuild. There it was. Not a demand. Not an expectation. A request. I looked at Ethan again, at the easy way he leaned into his father, the unquestioned connection between them. And I thought about what kind of home I wanted him to grow up in. One built on silence and resentment. Or one where mistakes were acknowledged and changed. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen, I said finally. I wouldn't ask you to. And I'm not going to trust you the same way right away. He nodded. I understand. But I will give you the chance to earn it back. Something in his expression shifted, not relief exactly, but something close. Thank you, he said. This isn't forgiveness, I added gently. It's a beginning. That's enough, he replied. Later that week we sat down with Diane. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no long speeches. Just a conversation. Uncomfortable, honest. She didn't cry. She didn't soften completely. But she looked at me and said I was wrong to judge before I understood. And for her that was a lot. It didn't erase the moment. But it acknowledged it. And sometimes that's where healing starts. Weeks passed. Then months. Trust didn't come back all at once. It came in small ways. In conversations that didn't get avoided. In questions that got asked instead of assumed. In the quiet daily choice to believe each other again and again. And one evening, sitting at the same table that once felt like a courtroom, I realized something. Family isn't just about who stands with you when things are easy. It's about who learns how to stand with you when they were wrong. If you've ever been misunderstood, judged too quickly, or hurt by the people who were supposed to protect you, know this. Truth has a way of finding its way back. But trust is something we build. Carefully. Patiently. And never blindly. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the people in your life and the trust you share with them. And if you believe in stories that remind us what really matters, consider sharing this one, or staying with us for more. Sometimes the quiet lessons are the ones that stay the longest. The end.